entitled "Mom Demands I Hand Over My Limited Edition Collector's Item Because Her Precious Angel Needs It More Than Me." I'm still reeling from this encounter and needed to share it with people who would understand. I'm a collector of vintage toys, specifically a certain 80s cartoon franchise that was huge when I was a kid. Recently, a very rare limited edition figure from that line went up for sale at a local collectible shop. I had been hunting for this particular figure for years, and it's considered a holy grail among collectors. It was pricey, but I'd saved up for it, knowing this might be my only chance. I went to the shop as soon as I could after work, practically sprinting through the door. There it was in a glass case, pristine condition, everything perfect. My heart was pounding as I asked the shop owner to take it out so I could get a closer look. While I was examining it, this woman, who I'll call EM, walked in with her son, maybe around 8 or 9 years old. The kid immediately beelined for the toy case, eyes wide. The EM comes over, sees the figure in my hands, and her face changes. She points at it and says, in this loud, demanding voice, "Excuse me, my son wants that." I was a bit taken aback and just kinda chuckled nervously, thinking she was joking. "Oh, well, I'm actually about to buy it," I said, turning back to the shop owner to finalize the purchase. She huffs and steps closer, her voice getting even louder. "No, you don't understand. My son really wants that. He's been so good today, and he deserves it. Give it to him." I stared at her, completely dumbfounded. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I'm buying this for myself. I've been looking for it for a very long time." Her eyes narrowed and she crossed her arms, planting herself firmly between me and the counter. "Are you serious? You're going to be selfish and deny my son something he wants? It's just a toy. Children are more important than toys. He'll be devastated if he doesn't get it." Her son, bless his heart, was looking incredibly uncomfortable, tugging at her sleeve and whispering something I couldn't hear. She just ignored him. I tried to reason with her, explaining that it wasn't just a toy to me, that it was a rare collectible, and that I was literally in the process of buying it. She cut me off again, escalating her volume even further. "Don't you understand, Shannon? He needs it. He has ADH, and this toy will really help him focus. It's practically therapy for him." "You wouldn't deny a child therapy, would you?" I almost choked on my own spit. A DHD therapy? From a vintage action figure? The shop owner, who had been patiently watching this unfold, finally stepped in. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "this gentleman was here first and is purchasing the item. We have other toys your son might like." EM turned her wrath on him. "Are you serious? You're taking his side? Don't you care about children? You should be ashamed of yourselves, prioritizing money over a child's happiness." She went on a full-blown rant about how selfish and horrible we were, how we were ruining her son's day, how he was going to have a meltdown, the whole 9 yards. The poor kid was practically hiding behind her legs by this point. I finally just pulled out my credit card, paid for the figure as quickly as possible, and practically ran out of the store, clutching my precious toy. I could still hear her yelling as I left. I felt a mix of anger, disbelief, and a strange sort of pity for her son. What kind of lesson is she teaching him? That he's entitled to anything he wants, regardless of who had it first or who worked for it? I'm just glad I finally have my figure, but the whole experience left a really sour taste in my mouth. I really hope that kid grows up to be nothing like his mother. ADHD therapy from an action figure? This is next level entitlement. If you're as speechless as I am, hit that subscribe button right now, because we dive into this madness every single day. Entitled "Father Demands I Give Up My First Class Plane Seat for His Kid Gets a Rude Awakening." I recently had a flight for a much needed vacation. I had saved up for months and decided to treat myself to a first class ticket. It was a long flight and I was really looking forward to the extra comfort and space. I boarded the plane, found my luxurious seat, and settled in with a sigh of contentment. Shortly after, a man who I'll call EF for entitled father boarded with his son, who looked to be around 10 years old. They were in economy, but as they walked past first class, the son stopped dead in his tracks, staring at the spacious seats with wide eyes. EF noticed his son's fascination and without a word walked right over to me. He leaned over and in a voice loud enough for half the first class cabin to hear said, "Excuse me, my son wants to sit here. You'll need to move to economy." I blinked at him, wondering if I'd misheard. "I'm sorry?" I asked, genuinely confused. My son, he repeated, pointing at the boy who was now practically drooling over the seats. He wants to sit in first class, so you'll have to move back to economy. It's only fair. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sir, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, I paid for this first class seat. I'm not moving. He scoffed, rolling his eyes like I was being utterly unreasonable. Don't be ridiculous. It's just a seat, and my son is a child. He'll be much more comfortable here than you will. Think of the child, for goodness sake. I am thinking of myself, I retorted, my patience wearing thin. I paid extra for this seat so I could be comfortable. Your son has a seat in economy. Perhaps you should have booked first class if you wanted him to sit here. EF's face started to redden. Are you actually refusing to give up your seat for a child? What kind of person are you? You're clearly selfish and have no consideration for others. At this point, a flight attendant who had been observing the situation approached us. Is everything all right here, sir? She asked politely. EF immediately turned to her, launching into a tirade about how I was refusing to give up my seat for his deserving son and how unfair and inconsiderate I was being. He expected the flight attendant to immediately side with him and force me out of my seat. However, the flight attendant was a seasoned professional. She listened patiently to EF's rant, then turned to me with a calm and professional demeanor. Sir, is there a problem? I explained that this man was demanding I give up my paid first-class seat for his son, who was ticketed in economy. The flight attendant's eyebrows rose slightly. She then turned back to EF, her voice firm but polite. Sir, I understand your son would like to sit in first class, but this gentleman has paid for his ticket and is entitled to his seat. First-class seats are subject to availability and must be purchased. If you wish to upgrade your son, you are welcome to inquire at the gate if there are any available seats and pay the upgrade fee. However, you cannot demand that another passenger give up their purchased seat. EF was apoplectic. He started sputtering about entitlement and bad customer service, and how he was going to complain to the airline, demanding a refund for my ticket and an upgrade for his entire family on their next flight. The flight attendant remained unruffled. Sir, please take your seat in economy. If you continue to cause a disturbance, I will have to ask security to escort you off the plane. That finally shut him up. He glared at me, muttered something under his breath about heartless people, and stomped off to economy with his crestfallen son trailing behind him. The flight attendant apologized for the disruption and offered me a complimentary drink. I happily accepted and settled back into my seat, thoroughly enjoying the sweet taste of justice and the extra legroom I'd rightfully paid for. It just goes to show entitlement gets you nowhere, especially not in first class. The entitled parents demand free cake smash photo shoot because it's good exposure. For who exactly? I'm a freelance photographer and I specialize in baby and children's photography. I love capturing those precious early moments for families, but sometimes the parents... Oh boy, the parents. I recently had an inquiry that just blew my mind with its sheer entitlement. A woman who I'll call EP for entitled parent contacted me about a cake smash photo shoot for her son's first birthday. We exchanged a few emails discussing dates, packages, and pricing. I have a standard pricing list that I send to all potential clients, clearly outlining the costs for different photo shoot options. My prices are competitive for my area, reflecting my experience, equipment, and the quality of my work. EP initially seemed fine with everything, even saying my portfolio was lovely and my prices were reasonable. Then she dropped the bomb. In her next email she wrote, "Actually, I was thinking, instead of paying for the photo shoot, how about we do a collaboration? You do the photo shoot for free and I'll promote your work on my social media. It will be great exposure for you." I stared at the email, incredulous. Exposure? Seriously? This is the classic exposure line that freelancers dread. It's code for I want your professional services for free because I think my meager social media following is worth more than your time and expertise. I politely responded, explaining that while I appreciated her offer, I run a business and rely on paying clients to make a living. I reiterated my pricing and mentioned that I occasionally offer discounts but not free photo shoots in exchange for social media promotion. EP's response was, predictable. Are you serious? You're really going to turn down this amazing opportunity for exposure? I have over 5,000 followers on Instagram. Think of all the potential clients you could get. You're being incredibly short-sighted and frankly, quite rude. I'm doing you a favor here. 5,000 followers is not exactly influencer territory, and even if it were 50,000, paying bills with exposure is not exactly a viable business model. I tried to explain this to her, patiently outlining the costs involved in running a photography business: equipment, editing software, studio rent, props, insurance, not to mention my time and skill. I even offered her a small discount as a gesture of goodwill. She completely ignored my explanation and doubled down on the entitlement. You photographers are all the same, so greedy and unprofessional. I know plenty of photographers who would jump at this opportunity for exposure. You're clearly not very good if you need to charge so much. My sister's friend's cousin has a camera and does photo shoots for free all the time. Maybe I should just ask her instead. You're going to regret losing out on this, you know. My son is going to be a famous child model one day, and you'll be kicking yourself for not taking this chance. I honestly just laughed out loud at that point. A famous child model? Based on what exactly? And the threat of regret? Please. I calmly replied, I wish you all the best in finding a photographer who meets your needs. However, my rates are as stated, and I won't be offering a free photo shoot in exchange for social media promotion. Thank you for your inquiry. I fully expected her to unleash a torrent of insults, but surprisingly, she just replied with a curt, fine, whatever, you'll regret this. And that was that. I highly doubt I'll be losing any sleep over regretting turning down a free photo shoot for exposure to 5,000 followers, especially when dealing with someone that entitled. I'd rather work with clients who value my work and are willing to pay for it. Thank you very much. Good riddance, EP, and good luck finding a photographer who works for exposure and potential fame that exists only in your mind. The 5,000 followers and exposure is doing you a favor? Honey, exposure doesn't pay the bills and your entitlement is showing. Hard pass. Entitled grandma throws a tantrum at the zoo because her grandchild can't pet the venomous snake. I witnessed something truly unbelievable at the zoo yesterday. I was enjoying a leisurely stroll through the reptile house, admiring the various snakes and lizards, when I heard a commotion nearby. It sounded like a child crying and a woman yelling, so naturally I cautiously moved closer to see what was going on. I arrived to find a grandmother, who I'll call EG for entitled grandma, standing in front of the enclosure for a highly venomous snake. I think it was a cobra, but I'm not a snake expert. Her grandson, maybe around 5 years old, was indeed crying, and EG was berating a zoo employee, a young woman who looked completely overwhelmed. EG was shouting, "This is ridiculous. You're ruining my grandson's day. He wants to pet the snake and you're telling him he can't? This is outrageous. We paid good money to get in here, and you're denying him a simple request." The zoo employee was trying to remain calm and professional, explaining, "Ma'am, I understand your grandson is disappointed, but it's simply not possible to pet the cobra. It's a venomous snake, and it's extremely dangerous. For his safety, and for the safety of our staff, we cannot allow anyone to touch it." EG was having none of it. "Don't tell me what my grandson can and can't do. He's a special child, and he's very good with animals. He's not afraid of snakes, he just wants to touch it. It's educational, you should be encouraging his curiosity, not stifling it." The grandson, still tearful, was clinging to her leg, occasionally glancing at the snake with a mixture of fear and fascination. The zoo employee patiently repeated, "Ma'am, with all due respect, it's not a matter of curiosity or bravery. This snake is venomous, one bite could be fatal. There is absolutely no way we can allow anyone to touch it. It's for everyone's safety." EG's face turned a shade of purple I didn't think was humanly possible. She started stomping her foot and yelling even louder, "This is discrimination. You're discriminating against my grandson because he's a child. If this was some adult expert, you'd let them touch it. You're biased against children. I demand to speak to your manager. This is unacceptable." A small crowd was starting to gather, drawn by the escalating volume of EG's tantrum. People were exchanging bewildered glances, and a few were even filming the spectacle on their phones. The zoo employee, clearly at her wit's end, radioed for her supervisor. While we waited for the manager to arrive, EG continued her tirade, now adding accusations of child abuse and emotional damage to her list of complaints. She even started banging on the glass enclosure, yelling at the snake, "See? He wants to be friends with you. Don't be mean to my grandson." Dude. When the manager finally arrived, he listened to EG's complaints with a weary sigh, clearly having dealt with similar situations before. He then calmly and firmly reiterated the zoo's policy: no petting the venomous snakes. He explained the dangers, the safety protocols, and the complete impossibility of fulfilling her request. EG predictably threw an even bigger tantrum, threatening to sue the zoo, leave bad reviews online, and tell everyone she knows never to visit. Eventually, the manager, with the help of another employee, managed to gently steer E.G. and her still crying grandson away from the snake enclosure. As they walked off, I heard E.G. muttering about stupid zoos and unreasonable rules. The zoo employee, who had initially dealt with E.G., looked utterly exhausted, but managed a weak smile at the onlookers who offered her words of sympathy. I just shook my head in disbelief. Some people truly believe that their special child or grandchild is entitled to bend reality to their whims, even when it comes to venomous snakes. It's a wonder the poor zoo employee didn't spontaneously combust from the sheer absurdity of it all. Discrimination for being a child against petting a cobra? This grandma is losing it. What is the most insane thing you have seen an entitled parent demand? Entitled, mom demands I pay for her child's ruined dress after her kid throws paint all over my art installation. I'm an artist and I recently had a small exhibition at a local community gallery. One of my pieces was an interactive installation involving colorful, non-toxic paint and large canvases where visitors were encouraged to contribute and create collaborative art. It was meant to be fun, engaging, and family-friendly, with clear signage indicating that it was an interactive piece and to be mindful of the paint. On the opening day, things were going well. People were enjoying the installation, kids were having a blast painting, and there was a generally positive and creative atmosphere. Then entitled mom, E.M., walked in with her daughter, maybe around 6 years old, who was wearing a pristine white dress. Already red flags were waving in my mind. I watched as E.M. and her daughter approached the installation. The daughter seemed excited, but E.M. looked apprehensive, almost disdainful. I saw the daughter reach for a paintbrush and dip it in some paint, clearly eager to participate. However, instead of guiding her daughter or supervising her, E.M. was busy on her phone, completely oblivious to what her child was doing. Inevitably, disaster struck. The daughter, in her enthusiasm, swung the paint-laden brush around and a large splattering of bright red paint landed directly on her pristine white dress. The daughter started to cry and E.M. finally looked up from her phone, her eyes widening in horror as she took in the paint-splattered dress. Instead of comforting her daughter or acknowledging that it was perhaps a predictable consequence of bringing a child in a white dress to a paint installation, E.M. immediately turned to me, her face contorted in anger. You did this. You ruined my daughter's dress." I was taken aback. "Ma'am, I'm sorry your daughter got paint on her dress, but this is an interactive paint installation. There are signs indicating it involves paint." E.M. was not having it. "Signs? What signs? I didn't see any signs. And even if there were signs, it's your responsibility to make sure children don't get paint on themselves. This is your fault. This dress was brand new and very expensive. You're gonna pay for it." I was completely bewildered. "Pay for it? Ma'am, I'm really sorry, but it's paint. It's part of the art installation. It's meant to be painted with." She scoffed, stepping closer and pointing a finger in my face. "Don't you try to blame me. This is your ridiculous art piece. It's dangerous and irresponsible to have paint out like this where children can get to it. You should have had someone supervising. You're going to replace this dress and you're going to compensate me for the emotional distress you've caused my daughter." Her daughter was still whimpering, looking more embarrassed than distressed in my opinion. I tried to reason with her, explaining again that it was an interactive art piece, that paint was involved, and that parental supervision was expected. I even pointed out the multiple signs clearly stating interactive paint installation. Please be mindful of paint. She waved her hand dismissively. "Those signs are too small, nobody reads those. It's still your fault. I demand you give me cash right now to replace this dress." I refused, of course. I offered her some wipes to try and clean up the paint, but she just threw them on the floor in disgust. She continued her rant, attracting the attention of other gallery visitors who were now staring at the scene with varying degrees of amusement and disbelief. Eventually realizing she wasn't going to get any money out of me, E.M. stormed off, dragging her daughter, paint-splattered dress and all behind her, muttering about terrible artists and lawsuits. I just sighed and shook my head. The entitlement was truly astounding. It's one thing to be upset that your child got paint on their clothes, but to demand that the artist pay for it, especially when it happened at an interactive paint installation with clear warnings, is just beyond ridiculous. Some people really do believe the world revolves around them and their precious children, and any minor inconvenience is someone else's fault and responsibility to fix, preferably with cash compensation. I just hope her daughter learns a valuable lesson about taking responsibility for her own actions and maybe avoiding wearing white to a paint party in the future. to white dress to a paint exhibit, unsupervised child, demanding you pay. The entitlement is dripping like paint. If you're loving this art of crazy, subscribe and have a great day.